Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of kzomradio's Unsolved Murders. Thank you so much for listening to the past 5 episodes. I know that they've been interesting and getting a lot of great responses from you guys on the on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and stuff, and I really appreciate the constant love. So I'm going to keep the series going for the next several weeks. We have a lot of serial killers to discuss. And then, of course, we're going to be switching topics around that time. But I wanted to get through a lot of these and everything. Also, just a quick shout out. If you listen to the show and you have ideas for like cryptids we may have overlooked, or things involving UFOs or ghosts or paranormal things that have like descriptions of events happening of kind of the same style of this show, I would really appreciate you shooting me an email at kzomradio@gmail.com. You can message me on Twitter at kzomradio, or go to go to kzomradio.com. You can find me on there. Just if you listen to the show, you can find me and let me know, please, because I'm always looking for new topics of conversation to do with the show. So anyway, this week we're going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer, which I think is really one of the most mysterious killers in the last half decade in the United States, for both known and unknown, just because it spawned such a phenomenon in the sense of being like adapted into film form, or having it being kind of parodied in film form and other aspects like that. So for those of you who know about the Zodiac Killer, this will be interesting. For those of you who don't know about the Zodiac Killer, get ready, because it's going to be quite an interesting ride. So without further ado, here we go. I present to you, I present for your consideration the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The killer's identity remains unknown. However, the Zodiac murdered victims in Benicia, Vallejo, Lake Berryessa, and San Francisco between December 1968 and October 1969. 4 men and 3 women between the ages of 16 and 29 were targeted. The killer originated the name Zodiac in a series of taunting letters sent to the local Bay Area press. These letters included 4 cryptograms. Of the 4 cryptograms sent, only 1 has been definitely solved. Numerous suspects have been named by law enforcement and amateur investigators, but no conclusive evidence has surfaced. In April 2004, the San Francisco Police Department marked the case as inactive, yet reopened the case at some point prior to March 2007. The case also remains open in the city of Vallejo, as well as Napa County and Solano County. The California Department of Justice has maintained an open case file on the Zodiac murders since 1969. Victims. Confirmed victims of the Zodiac Killer. Although the Zodiac claimed 37 murders and letters to newspaper, investigators agree on only 7 confirmed victims, 2 of whom survived. They are David Arthur Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, shot and killed on December 20th, 1968 on Lake Herman Road within the city limits of Benicia. Michael Renault Magau, 19, Darlene Elizabeth Farron, 22, shot on July 5th, 1969, in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. While Magau survived the attack, Farron was pronounced dead on arrival at Kaiser Foundation Hospital. Brian Calvin Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22, stabbed on September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa in Napa County. Hartnell survived 8 stab wounds to the back, but Shepard died as a result to her injuries on September 29, 1969. Paul Lee Stein, 29, shot and killed on October 11, 1969, in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. Suspected victims. The following murder victims are suspected to be victims of the Zodiac, though none have been confirmed. Robert Domingos, 18, and Linda Edwards, 17, shot and killed on June 4, 1963, on a beach near Lompoc. Edwards and Domingo were identified as possible Zodiac victims because of specific similarities between their attack and the Zodiac attack on the Lake Berryessa 6 years later. Sherry Jo Bates, 18, stabbed to death and nearly decapitated on October 30th, 1966 at Riverside City College in Riverside. Bates' possible connection to the Zodiac only appeared 4 years after her murder, when San Francisco Chronicle reporter Paul Avery received a tip regarding similarities between the Zodiac killing and the circumstances surrounding Bates' death. Donna Lass, 25, last seen on September 6, 1970 in State Line, Nevada. A postcard with an advertisement from the Forest Pines condominiums pasted on the back was received at the Chronicle on March 22, 1971, and has been interpreted as a Zodiac claiming Lass's disappearance as a victim. No evidence has been uncovered to identify connection between Donna Lass's disappearance with the Zodiac Killer. There is also a suspected third escapee from the Zodiac Killer. Kathleen Johns, 22, allegedly abducted on March 22, 1970, on Highway 132 near the I-580 in an area west of Modesto. Johns escaped from a car with a man who drove her and her infant daughter around the area between Stockton and Patterson for approximately 3 hours. Timeline of the Zodiac murders. Lake Herman Road attack. The first murders widely attributed to the Zodiac Killer were the shootings of high school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday on December 20th, 1968 on Lake Herman Road just inside Benicia city limits. The couple were on their first date and planned to attend a Christmas concert at Hogan High School about 3 blocks from Jensen's home. The couple instead visited a friend before stopping at a local restaurant and then driving out on Lake Herman Road. At about 10:15 p.m., Faraday parked his mother's Rambler in a gravel turnout, which was known as a lover's lane. Shortly after 11 p.m., their bodies were discovered by Stella Borges, who lived nearby. The Solano County Sheriff's Department investigated the crime, but no leads developed. Utilizing the available forensic data, Robert Graysmith postulated that another car pulled into the turnout just prior to 11 p.m. and parked alongside the couple. The killer apparently exited the second car and walked towards the Rambler, possibly ordering the couple out. Jensen appeared to have exited the car first, yet when Faraday was halfway out, the killer apparently shot Faraday in the head. Fleeing from the killer, Jensen was gunned down 28 feet from the car with 5 shots through her back. The killer then drove off. The Blue Rock Springs attack. Just before midnight on July 4th, 1969, Darlene Farron and Michael McGow drove into the Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, 4 miles from the Lake Herman Road murder site, and parked. While the couple sat in Farron's car, a second car drove into the lot and parked alongside them, but almost immediately drove away. Returning about 10 minutes later, the second car parked behind them. The driver of the second car then exited the vehicle, approaching the passenger side of Farron's car, carrying a flashlight and a 9mm Luger. The killer directed the flashlight into McGow and Farron's eyes before shooting at them, firing 5 times. Both victims were hit, several bullets passing through McGow and into Farron. The killer walked away from the car, but upon hearing McGow's moaning, returned and shot each victim twice before driving off. On July 5th, 1969, at 12:40 a.m., a man phoned the Vallejo Police Department to report and claim responsibility for the attack. The caller also took credit for the murders of Jensen and Faraday 6.5 months earlier. The police traced a call to a phone booth at a gas station about 0.3 of a mile from Farron's home and only a few blocks from the Vallejo Police Department. Farron was pronounced dead at the hospital. McGow survived the attack despite being shot in the face, neck, and chest. Letters from the Zodiac. On August 1st, 1969, 3 letters prepared by the killer were received at the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. The nearly identical letters took credit for the shootings at the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. Each letter was also included 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram, which the killer claimed to contain his identity. The killer demanded they be printed on each paper's front page, or he would cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night and then move on to kill again until I end up with 12 people over the weekend. The Chronicle published its third of the cryptogram on page 4 of the next day's edition. An article printed alongside the code quoted Vallejo Police Chief Jack E. Stiltz as saying, "We're not satisfied that the letter was written by the murderer," and requested the writer send a second letter with more facts to prove his identity. The threatened murders did not happen, and all 3 parts were eventually published. On August 7th, 1969, another letter was received at the San Francisco Examiner with the salutation, "Dear Editor, this is a Zodiac speaking." This was the first time the killer had used a name for identification. The letter was a response to Chief Stiltz's request for more details that would prove he had killed Faraday, Jensen, and Farron. In it, the Zodiac included details about the murder which had not yet been released to the public, as well as a message to the police that when they cracked his code, they will have me. On August 8th, 1969, Donald and Betty Hardin of Salinas, California, cracked the 408-symbol cryptogram It contained a misspelled message in which the killer claimed to be collecting slaves for the afterlife. No name appeared in the decoded text, and the killer said he would not give much away of his identity because it would slow down or stop his slave collection. Lake Berryessa attack. On September 27, 1969, Pacific Union College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking at Lake Berryessa on a small island connected by a sand spit to Twin Oak Ridge. A man approached them wearing a black executioner-type hood with clip-on sunglasses over the eye holes and a bib-like device on his chest that had a white 3x3 cross symbol on it. He approached them with a gun, which Hartnell believed to be a .45. The hooded man claimed to be an escaped convict from Deer Lodge, Montana, where he killed a guard and stole a car, explaining that he needed their car and money to go to Mexico. He had bought pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline and told Shepard to tie up Hartnell before he tied her up. The killer checked and tightened Hartnell's bonds after discovering Shepard had bound Hartnell's hands loosely. Hartnell initially believed it to be a weird robbery, but the man drew a knife and stabbed them both repeatedly. The killer then hiked 500 yards back up to Knoxville Road and drew the cross-circle symbol on Hartnell's car door with the black felt-tip pen, and wrote beneath it, Vallejo, 12/20/68, 7/4/69, September 27, 69, 6:30, by knife. At 7:40 p.m., the killer called the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a payphone to report his latest crime. The phone was found, but still off the hook, minutes later at the Napa County Car Wash on Main Street in Napa by kzomradio reporter Paul Stanley, only a few blocks from the sheriff's office, yet 27 miles from the crime scene. Detectives were able to lift a still wet palm print from the telephone, but were never able to match it to any suspect. After hearing their screams for help, a man and his son who were fishing in a nearby cove discovered the victims and summoned help by contacting park rangers. Napa County Sheriff's deputies Dave Collins and Ray Land were the first law enforcement officers to arrive at the crime scene. Cecilia Shepard was conscious when Collins arrived, providing him with a detailed description of the attacker. Hartnell and Shepard were taken to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa by an ambulance. Shepard lapsed into a coma during the transport and never regained consciousness. She died 2 days later, but Hartnell survived to recount his tale to the press. Napa County Sheriff Detective Ken Narlow, who was assigned to the case from the outset, worked on solving the crime until his retirement from the department in 1987. Presidio Heights attack. 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, a passenger entered a cab driven by Paul Stein at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets in San Francisco, requesting to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights. For reasons unknown, Stein drove one block past Maple to Cherry Street. The passenger then shot Stein once in the head with a 9mm, took Stein's wallet, car keys, and tore away a section of Stein's bloodstained shirt tail. The passenger was observed by 3 teenagers across the street at 9:55, who called the police while the crime was in progress. They observed the man to be wiping the cab down before walking away towards the Presidio 1 block to the north. 2 blocks from the crime scene, an officer responding to the call observed a white man walking alongside the sidewalk and stepped into a stairwell leading to the front yard of one of the homes on the north side of the street. The encounter lasted only 5 to 10 seconds. The radio dispatcher had alerted to be on the lookout for a black suspect, so they drove past him without stopping. The mix-up of descriptions remains unexplained to this day. A search ensued, but no possible suspects were found. The 3 teen witnesses worked with a police artist to prepare a composite sketch of Stein's killer. Then, a few days later, the police artist returned, working with the witnesses to prepare a second composite sketch of the killer. Detectives Bill Armstrong and Dave Tashi were assigned to the case. The San Francisco Police Department investigated an estimated 2,500 suspects over a period of years. Stein letter and bus threat. On October 14, 1969, the Chronicle received another letter from the Zodiac, this time containing a swatch of Paul Stein's shirt as proof he was the killer. It also included a threat about killing school children on a school bus. To do this, Zodiac wrote, "Just shoot out the front tire and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out." Call to a talk show. At 2 p.m. on October 20th, 1969, someone claiming to be the Zodiac called the Oakland Police Department demanding that one of 2 prominent lawyers, F.E. Bailey or Melvin Belly, appear on Jim Dunbar's television talk show in the morning. Bailey was not available, but Belly did appear on the show. Dunbar appealed to the viewers to keep the lines open, and eventually someone claiming to be the Zodiac called several times and said his name was Sam. Belly agreed to meet with him in Daly City, but the suspect never showed up. The 340-character cryptogram. On November 8, 1969, the Zodiac mailed a card with another cryptogram consisting of 340 characters. The 340-character cipher was never decoded. Numerous possible solutions have been suggested, but none can be claimed as definitive. Second Stein letter. On November 9, 1969, the Zodiac mailed a 7-page letter claiming that 2 policemen stopped and actually spoke with him 3 minutes after the shooting. Excerpts from the letter were published in the Chronicle on November 12th, including the Zodiac claim. That same day, the police officer who spotted the suspect wrote a memo explaining what had happened that night. Melvin Belly letter. On December 20th, 1969, exactly 1 year after the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, the Zodiac mailed a letter to Belly, including another swatch of Stein's shirt. The Zodiac claimed he wanted Belly to help him. Modesto attack. On the night of March 22, 1970, Kathleen Johns was driving from San Bernardino to Petaluma to visit her mother. She was 7 months pregnant and had her 10-month-old daughter beside her. While heading west on the highway near Modesto, the car behind her began honking its horn and flashing its headlights. She pulled off the road and stopped. The man in the car parked behind her approached her car and stated that he observed that her right wheel well was wobbling and offered to tighten the lug nuts. After finishing his work, the man drove off, yet when Johns pulled forward to re-enter the highway, the wheel almost immediately came off her car. The man returned and offered to drive her to the nearest gas station for help. She and her daughter climbed into his car. During the ride, the car passed several stations, but the man did not stop. For about 90 minutes, he drove back and forth around the back roads near Tracy, California. When Johns asked why he was not stopping, he would change the subject. When the driver finally stopped at an intersection, Johns jumped out of the car with her daughter and hid in a field. The driver then closed his car door and drove off. Johns hitched a ride to the police station in Patterson. When Johns gave her statement to the sergeant on duty, she noticed the police composite sketch of Paul Stein's killer and recognized him as the man who abducted her and her child. Fearing the Zodiac might come back and kill them all, the sergeant had Johns wait in the dark at a nearby Mills restaurant. When her car was found, it had been gutted and torched. Most accounts claim he threatened to kill her and her daughter while driving around, but at least one police report disputes that. John's accounts to Paul Avery on the Chronicle indicate that her abductor left his car and searched for her in the dark with a flashlight. However, in one report she made to the police, he did not leave his vehicle. Further Zodiac communications. The Zodiac continued to communicate with authorities for the remainder of 1970 via letters and greeting cards to the press. In a letter postmarked April 20th, 1970, the Zodiac wrote, "My name is blank," followed by a 13-character cipher. The Zodiac went on to state that he was not responsible for the recent bombing of a police station in San Francisco, referring to the February 18th, 1970 death of Sergeant Brian McDonnell 2 days after the bombing of Park Station in the Golden Gate Park, but added, "There is more glory to killing a cop than a Sid, because a cop can shoot back." The letter included a diagram of the bomb the Zodiac claimed he would use to blow up a school bus. Zodiac sent a greeting card postmarked April 28, 1970 to the Chronicle. Written on the card was, "I hope you enjoyed yourselves when I have my blast," followed by the Zodiac's cross-circle signature. On the back of the card, the Zodiac threatened to use the bus bomb soon unless the newspaper published the full details he wrote. He also wanted to start seeing people wearing some nice Zodiac buttons. In a letter postmarked June 26, 1970, the Zodiac stated that he was upset that he did not see people wearing Zodiac buttons. He wrote, "I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. The Zodiac was possibly referring to the murder of Sergeant Richard Radatich a week earlier. On June 19th at 5:25 a.m., Radatich was writing a parking ticket in a squad car when an assailant shot him in the head with a .38 caliber pistol. Radatich died 15 hours later. San Francisco Police Department denies the Zodiac was involved in the murder. It remains unsolved. Included with the letter was a Phillips 66 road map of the San Francisco Bay Area. On the image of Mount Diablo, the Zodiac had drawn a cross circle similar to the one he had included in previous correspondence. The top of the cross circle he placed a 0, and then a 3, a 6, and a 9. The accompanying instructions stated that the 0 was to be set to magnetic north. The letter also included a 32-letter cipher that the killer claimed would, in conjunction with the code, lead to the location of a bomb he had buried and set to go off in the fall. The cipher was never decoded, and the alleged bomb was never located. In a letter to the Chronicle postmarked July 24, 1970, the Zodiac took credit for Kathleen John's abduction 4 months after the incident. In a July 26, 1970 letter, the Zodiac paraphrased the song. In July 26, 1970, In a July 26, 1970 letter, the Zodiac paraphrased a song from the Mikado, adding his own lyrics about making a little fist of the ways he planned to torture his slaves in paradise. The letter was signed with a large, exaggerated cross-circle symbol. A final note at the bottom of the letter stated, P.S. The Mount Diablo code concerns radians plus # inches along the radians. In 1981, a close examination of the radian hint by the Zodiac researcher Gareth Penn led to the discovery of that a radian angle, when placed over the map per the Zodiac's instructions, pointed to the locations of 2 of the Zodiac attacks. On October 7, 1970, the Chronicle received a 3x5-inch card signed by the Zodiac with the cross circle drawn in blood. The card's message was formed by pasting words and letters from an edition of the Chronicle, and 13 holes were punched in the card. Inspectors Armstrong and Tashi agreed that it was highly probable that the card came from the Zodiac. Zodiac letter to Paul Avery. On October 27, 1970, Chronicle reporter Paul Avery, who had been covering the Zodiac case, received a Halloween card signed to the letter Z and the Zodiac cross-circle symbol. Handwritten on the card was a note, Peekaboo, you are all doomed. Handwritten on the card was the note, Peekaboo, you are doomed. The threat was taken seriously and received a front-page story on the Chronicle. Soon after receiving the letter, Avery received an anonymous letter alerting him to the similarities between the Zodiac activities and the unsolved murder of Sherry Jo Bates, which had occurred 4 years earlier at a college in Riverside in greater Los Angeles area. All right. Soon after receiving this letter, Avery received an anonymous letter alerting him to the similarities between the Zodiac's activities and the unsolved murder of Sherry Jo Bates, which had occurred 4 years earlier at the City College in Riverside in the greater Los Angeles area, more than 400 miles south of San Francisco. He reported his findings to the Chronicle on November 16, 1970. The Riverside attack. On October 30th, 1966, 18-year-old Sherry Jo Bates spent the evening at the campus library annex until it was closed at 9 p.m. Neighbors reported hearing a scream around 10:30 p.m. Bates was found dead the next morning, a short distance from the library, between 2 abandoned houses slated to be demolished for campus renovations. The wires in her Volkswagen distributor cap had been pulled out. She was brutally beaten and stabbed to death. A man's Timex watch with a torn wristband was found nearby. The watch had stopped at 12:24 a.m. Police believe that the attack happened much earlier. A month later, on November 29, 1966, nearly identical typewritten letters were mailed to the Riverside Police and the Riverside Press Enterprise, titled The Confession. The author claimed responsibility for the Bates murder, providing details of the crime that were not released to the public. The author warned that Bates is not the first and she will not be the last. In December 1966, a poem was discovered carved into a bottom side of a desktop at the Riverside City College, titled Sick of Living, Unwilling to Die. The poem's language and handwriting resembled those of the Zodiac letters. It was signed with what were assumed to be the initials R.H. Sherwood Morrill, California's top questioned documents examiner, expressed his opinion that the poem was written by the Zodiac. On April 30th, 1967, exactly 6 months after Bates' murder, Bates' father Joseph, the Press Enterprise, and the Riverside Police all received nearly identical letters. In handwritten scrawl, the Press Enterprise and police copies read, Bates had to die, there will be more, with a small scribble at the bottom that resembled the letter Z. Joseph Bates' copy read, she had to die, there will be more, without a Z signature. On March 13, 1971, nearly 4 months after Paul Avery's first article on Bates, the Zodiac mailed a letter to the Los Angeles Times in which he credited the police instead of Avery for discovering his Riverside activity, but they were only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there. The connection between Cherry Joe Bates, Riverside, and the Zodiac remains uncertain. Paul Avery and the Riverside Police Department maintain that the Bates homicide was not committed by the Zodiac, but did concede that some of the Bates letters may have been his work to falsify claim credit. Lake Tahoe disappearance. On March 22, 1971, a postcard to the Chronicle addressed to Paul Avery and believed to be from the Zodiac appeared to take credit for the disappearance of Donna Lass on September 6, 1970. Made from a collage of advertisements and magazine lettering, it featured a scene from an advertisement for Forest Pines condominiums and the text Sierra Club sought victim 12, peeked through the pines, past Lake Tahoe areas, and around in the snow. The Zodiac's cross-circle symbol was in the place of the usual return address. Lass was a nurse at the Sierra Tahoe Hotel and Casino. She worked until about 2 a.m. on September 6, 1970, treating her last patient at 1:40 a.m. Later that same day, both Lass's employer and her landlord received phone calls from an unknown male falsely claiming that Lass had left town due to a family emergency. Lass was never found. What appeared to be a gravesite was discovered near the Claire Tappan Lodge in Northern California on the Sierra Club property, but an excavation yielded only a pair of sunglasses. No evidence has been uncovered to definitively connect Donna Lass's disappearance with the Zodiac Killer. The Santa Barbara attack. In Vallejo Times Herald story appearing on November 13, 1972, Santa Barbara Sheriff's Detective Bill Baker postulated that the murders of a young couple in northern Santa Barbara County might have been the work of the Zodiac Killer. On June 4, 1963, high school seniors Robert Domingos and his fiancée Linda Edwards were shot dead out on beach near Lompoc, having skipped a day of school for senior ditch day. Police believed that the assailant attempted to bind the victims, but when they freed themselves and attempted to flee, the killer shot them repeatedly in the back and chest with a .22 caliber weapon. The killer then placed their bodies in a small shack and tried, unsuccessfully, to burn it down. Final Zodiac letter. After the Pines card, the Zodiac remained silent for nearly 3 years. The Chronicle then received a letter from the Zodiac postmarked January 29, 1974, praising The Exorcist as the best satirical comedy that he'd ever seen. The letter included a snippet of the verse from the Mikado and an unusual symbol at the bottom that has remained unexplained by researchers. Zodiac suspect. Arthur Lee Allen. Arthur Lee Allen was the only suspect in the Zodiac murders to be served search warrants by police. He was never charged with any Zodiac-related crime, and his fingerprints did not match those left by the killer of the taxicab Paul Stine. In 1991, 22 years after the shootings, Survival Michael McNew identified Allen as the man who shot him from a photo lineup of a 1968 driver's license. McGow stated he had never been shown a photo lineup prior to the appointment in 1991. Allen, who suffers from diabetes, died on August 26, 1992 from kidney failure. In 2002, San Francisco Police Department developed a partial DNA profile from saliva on stamps and envelopes of the Zodiac letters. The police department compared this partial DNA to the DNA of the Vallejo Police Department's lead suspect, Arthur Lee Allen. A DNA comparison was also made with Don Cheney's DNA, who was Allen's former close friend and the first person to suggest that Allen may be the Zodiac Killer. Since neither test result indicated a match, Allen and Cheney were excluded as contributors of the DNA, though it cannot be stated definitely that it is DNA from the Zodiac on the envelopes. Additionally, in 2002, a partial palm print called the writer's palm was lifted from the Exorcist letter and then compared to the palm print of Allen's. Again, test results showed the palm prints did not match. Even though DNA samples taken from the letters sent by the Zodiac ruled out Allen as a person who handled them, neither the Vallejo nor the San Francisco police departments have ruled Allen out as a suspect. Current state of investigations. In April 2004, the SFPD marked the case as inactive, citing case overload pressure and resource demands. However, they reopened the case sometime before March 2007. In 2007, Dennis Kaufman, the stepson of a man named Jack Terrence, claimed that his stepfather was a Zodiac. Kaufman turned several items over to the FBI, including a hood similar to the one worn by the Zodiac. According to the news sources, the DNA analysis conducted by the FBI on the items were deemed inconclusive in 2010. Kaufman's claims have later been widely discredited. He claimed to have been incriminating rolls of film taken by his stepfather, The photos allegedly showed victims of the crimes. Kaufman later published some of these photos on his own webpage. The photos are very small, had low resolution, and were so blurry that nothing could be positively identified. An associate of Kaufman's, Nanette Bartow, received her forensic document examining certificate through an online course. She claimed to have matched Jack Terrance's handwriting to that of the Zodiac Killer. In 2010, the FBI's head document examiner at Quantico deemed the handwriting inconclusive. In 2009, Deborah Perez claimed her father, Guy Ward Hendrickson, was a Zodiac. However, Perez also allegedly claimed that she was the illegitimate daughter of President John F. Kennedy, so her claim that her father was a Zodiac has been viewed as unlikely. In 2009, a lawyer named Robert Tarbox, who in 1975 had his law license suspended in California for failure to pay some clients, said that in 1972 a merchant marine walked into his office and confessed to him that he was a Zodiac killer. The seemingly lucid seaman, whose name Tarbox wouldn't reveal due to confidentiality, described his crimes briefly but persuasively enough to convince Tarbox. The man claimed he was trying to stop himself from his opportunistic murder spree, but never returned to see Tarbox again. Tarbox took out a full-page ad in the Vallejo Times-Herald in which he cleared the name of Arthur Lee Allen as the killer. His only reason for revealing the story 30 years after the fact. Robert Graysmith, the author of several books on the Zodiac, said Tarbox's story was entirely plausible. Retired police handwriting expert Lloyd Cunningham, who worked the Zodiac case for decades, added, "They gave me banana boxes full of Allen's writings, and none of his writings even came close to the Zodiac, nor did DNA extracted from the envelopes on the Zodiac letters come close to Arthur Lee Allen." The Vallejo Police Department website maintains a link for providing Zodiac crime tips. There's also an open case in Napa County and also one in Riverside. On February 19th, 2011, America's Most Wanted featured a story about the Zodiac Killer. A picture had recently surfaced of known Zodiac victim Darlene Ferrin and a man who closely resembles a composite sketch formed based on eyewitness descriptions of the Zodiac Killer. Police believe the photo was taken in San Francisco in the summer of 1966 or 1967. Police hope that someone can identify the man in the photo. It has been suspected that the man in the photo is Darlene Ferrin's ex-husband, James Phillips. This has not been confirmed. So, I mean, obviously the Zodiac case has spanned quite an investigation and quite a cult following, too, if you think about it, with Robert Graysmith writing the books and, of course, you know, Fincher's 2007 movie Zodiac with Jake Gyllenhaal. It's interesting that, you know, they keep trying to go back to Arthur Lee Allen and, you know, even in the movie really kind of pinned it on him. You know, Fincher was like, this guy did it, you know. And, I mean, they obviously have to have good reason to want to go after Allen, but they've never able to pin it on him whatsoever. So it just seems kind of weird. But I mean, you know, here's an opinion, here's a thought. You know, okay, all the letters that came in had details about the killings, right? Well, what if the killings were completely non-related, right? Because they don't really look like they were very much related, right? And what if it was a cop on the inside who was fucking with the department, someone was crazy writing letters and shit and doing that kind of stuff? Because it's like the Zodiac was trying to get attention but never actually came forward. So, I don't know. I mean, that's just an idea. It's a thought that I had while I was going through this. I could be wrong. Anyway, what are your thoughts on the Zodiac Killer? I'm very curious. Let us know at kzomradio on Twitter, kzomradio.com, youtube.com/kzomradio, facebook.com/kzomradio. Just Google KZOM and you will find us. And we'll be back next week with another episode of KZOM Radio's Unsolved, or Know Your Legends, Unsolved Murders. My name is Matt Jarbo. Have yourself a great week. See you later. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of KZOM Radio's Know Your Legends, Unsolved Murders. If you'd like to advertise on this podcast, please visit kzomradio.com for details.